distinguished colleagues, dear participants, dear mentors, dear mentees, and dear friends. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to the Space for Women show today as we continue together to explore Series 12, Space Archaeology and the Future. Our aim today is to discuss what is space archaeology and how crew members use material objects to create a society within space habitats. This will be presented by Dr. Alice Gorman from Australia. And then we will also discuss cultural life on the ISS, religious expressions by Dr. Justin Walsh. And we are then talking about space and spirituality with Ms. Ivonne Delaflor, and how the future of technology can be seen through sacred geometry. Ladies and gentlemen, join our distinguished guests today, Dr. Justin St. P. Walsh. He's a space archaeologist and associate professor and author. Ms. Ivonne Delaflor, a futurist and spiritual scientist, teacher, alongside with UNOOSA's Space for Women Network mentors, Dr. Alice Gorman. She's an Australian associate professor, a space archaeologist and author, and also our team member, Dr. Alissa J. Haddaji. Welcome to the Space for Women show. Alissa is a space law and policy expert at the Harvard University and Space for Women mentor and our moderator for the first part of the show today. Alissa, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Hien, and thank you everyone for being here. Today I'll have the pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Gorman and Dr. Walsh, and they will each have 10 to 15 minutes to go through fantastic presentations on what space archaeology is, before I will turn back to Hien so that we discover the work of Ivonne. So, first of all, let me introduce you to Dr. Alice Gorman. As Hien just mentioned, she is an assistant professor at Flinders University in Australia. She's specialized in the field of space archaeology and heritage, and she's also a UNOOSA Space for Women network mentor. Her research focuses on space junk, planetary landsite, off-Earth mining, rocket launch pads, and antennas. Dr. Gorman is also a co-PI of the International Space Station Archaeological Project, the first archaeological study of space habitats, and she is also the author of the Dr. Space Junk versus the Universe, Archaeology and the Future. You will be able to tweet at Alice at Dr. Space Junk and follow her blogs on space archaeology. Alice, the floor is yours. I think you have a presentation for us today.
I do. Thank you so much, Alissa, and it's fantastic to be on the Space for Women show to talk about space archaeology. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. So just give me a minute while I try and get this. Where are we? So what I wanted to start with is just to introduce the concept of space archaeology, what it actually is. So people are very used to the idea that archaeologists look at old things, but in fact, archaeology is a set of methods and techniques for looking at how humans interact with material culture. And when we're talking about space archaeology, we're talking about all of the stuff that is associated with the human movement into space in the 20th and 21st centuries. And these are places on Earth, in Earth orbit, and across the solar system. There's a time frame for this. It's roughly 1936 when the very first rocket capable of getting into space was developed. This was the V2 in Germany. And our geographic range is from Earth into interstellar space, where the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecraft currently are traveling. So when we talk about the material culture of space, we're talking about sites and artifacts, objects and environments that people interact with. So the kinds of things that we're interested in on Earth, there are launch sites and tracking stations, research and development sites, manufacturing places. In Earth orbit, we have, as we know, a massive amount of space junk, as well as around 4,000 operating satellites. On other solar system bodies, we have planetary landing sites, both robotic and human, and of course people would be very familiar with the Apollo sites on the moon, such as the Apollo 11 landing, which we celebrated the 50th anniversary of last year. There are spacecraft spread through the middle solar system, and some that are currently out past Pluto. So they're all things that space archaeologists look at too. But what Justin and I want to do this evening, this afternoon, is talk about a project looking at the archaeology of space habitats. And of course, the most well-known of these, and the only one currently occupied, is the International Space Station. What I've been interested in is thinking about the International Space Station as a habitat, but also as a house, a thing we're very familiar with on Earth. So I wanted to delve a little deeper into what a house actually is. And houses are actually very complex. So first of all, they're material things. They're made out of solid stuff that we can touch and be in. But they're also microenvironments in their own right. They have their own flora and fauna and dust and microclimates. Houses are always located somewhere. So on Earth, they're part of a landscape, but in space, they're part of very different kinds of landscapes. Perhaps most importantly, houses are the places where we get socialized as human beings. They're where we learn what to do in the right kind of place, in the right kind of order, and where we form bonds with family and other people who come in and out of the house. Some people have argued that houses are like an extension of the body, so they're very embodied spaces. And they're also places where memory is developed. Rooms hold the memory of events and periods of our life. Objects in rooms are things that hold our memory. And this is something I'll come back to a little bit later on. So thinking about what makes the International Space Station a very particular kind of house, I want to compare it, first of all, to the kinds of houses that we're most familiar with on Earth. So in these houses, our movements and our life is structured by gravity. We have our feet on the floor, our head is pointing towards the ceiling. Inside and outside the house, pressure is the same. We can go in and out with no problems, but we do have divisions. So the walls are something that demarcate the inside of the house where we live from the outside world, from the rest of the world. Houses are designed to be oriented to the body standing flat on the surface. So doors and windows and walls are all placed so that we can use them. And in the contemporary industrial world, houses tend to be angular. They tend to be, not always, but they tend to be square. They tend to have right-angled walls. So we're very used to this kind of very angular geometry in houses. And more importantly, houses on Earth stay where you put them most of the time. They're static and stationary. So this is very different to space habitats like the International Space Station. In this instance, there is no up and down. Gravity has no effect when you're in free fall. The inside and the outside are incredibly different. The inside of the station is pressurized. You cannot go outside unless you're encased in a spacesuit. And space stations from the time of Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, who was one of the earliest people to theorize them, have tended to be spherical, wheel-shaped, teardrop-shaped, or cylindrical. So this is a very curvilinear geometry. And of course, space habitats in orbit are moving at incredibly high speeds. So these are some points of contrast between habitats or houses on Earth and those in Earth orbit. But it's interesting because as archaeologists, Justin and I are also very familiar with the kinds of structures from the deep human past. So this curvilinear architecture is actually something that used to be the dominant architectural style. And you can see some archaeological examples here. Some of the earliest houses we know are round houses built during the ice ages out of mammoth bones. And you can see another example there from the 5th to 4th century BCE. And I've also put in a much more modern kind of house. This is the very famous Futuro house designed in the 1960s by Matti Syrinen. So curvilinear architecture still exists in the world. It's the most prevalent kind of architecture in some places, but it's an interesting contrast to the kinds of dwellings that we're generally accustomed to on Earth. So one of the problems of living in orbit is that a compromise has to be reached, some kind of balance between everything that you can do when you have microgravity and you have no obligation to be facing a certain way. You can use 360 degrees of space, but humans aren't very used to that. So there has to be some kind of compromise reached between the familiar and the unfamiliar, things that are like a home or a house, but will work in microgravity, will work in those very peculiar conditions. And I've got a couple of pictures here. One shows you Skylab, the Skylab space station launched in the 1970s, in which the living spaces were across the body of the cylinder. And this is in contrast to the International Space Station, where the spaces are linear along the body of the cylinder. The space station is basically a whole series of tubes stuck together. So as part of reaching this balance, something has to be done to make microgravity familiar in a way that it isn't for most of us who never get this opportunity to go to space. Something that helps us create memory in terrestrial houses in full gravity is the fact that when you put an object down or store it somewhere, it will stay there and you remember where it is. On the International Space Station, if objects are not fixed, then you can lose sight of them incredibly quickly. So nothing will stay where you put it. Things move around all of the time. So some of the technologies that are used to create the experience of being in gravity while you're in microgravity are some of the most simple things that many of us use every day on Earth. These are things like Ziploc bags, the little plastic bags with a resealable top, patches of Velcro, various straps and meshes, as you can see in this very recent picture. So these, in our own kitchen, we might use a Ziploc bag to store some leftover food, or we might have it in our garage with nails or bits of equipment in, all kinds of uses for these bags. But transfer them to a microgravity situation and suddenly these little bits of plastic that are manufactured in their millions and discarded in their millions take on a very different role. They're actually used to replicate the effects of gravity, and with that, memory, so you can remember where something is. So they're a material object that mediates between the requirements of humans accustomed to gravity and living in the International Space Station without that affordance. So coming back to the idea of the house, this kind of memory has to be created by using material objects in a way that is quite different to how we do it on Earth. And I'm using this as an example to demonstrate how these material objects can become of interest to an archaeologist to study. And as part of our project, we're using NASA's inventory management system to find out how many Ziploc bags, for example, go in and out of the space station, and what they're used for, how they're adapted to unintended uses, and how they become part of those daily routines which make up the society of the ISS. So that's just a very brief little taste of what space archaeology is about, in particular in the context of the International Space Station. So I will leave it there and pass back to you, Alissa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was deeply interesting, and I immediately have two questions for you before we move on to our next panelist. First of all, how did you end up studying space archaeology? I'm sure when people learn about your field, they're saying, I've never heard of it, I didn't know it existed. So what brought you to this field?
It's true, like people are quite surprised that you can put these two things together. And the story is sort of quite simple. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be an astrophysicist, but kind of ended up getting stuck on human behavior. Became an archaeologist, and when I was I'd finished my PhD. I think I was in my 30s, mid-30s or something. And one night I had an experience when I was just staring up at the night sky, and I realized that amongst all of the stars, there was also all of this space junk. And that was the turning point. From that moment, I decided I was going to try and do the archaeology of space junk in the solar system.
Impressive. I also would like to know, when we look at you showed us a lot of designs and architecture. So how do you see a space archaeology fitting and working with space designers and space architects?
That is exactly the point of our project, Alissa. That's very perceptive, and Justin will talk a bit more about this. So, I mean, usually when archaeologists study past human behaviour, there's a limited possibility of applying that to, you know, contemporary problems in the world. But because we're studying this contemporary stuff, this is stuff happening all around us, and we do have a wealth of information. One of our aims, as well as understanding this formation of these space societies, is actually to provide very concrete recommendations that can be used in the design of future habitats. So we see this as a very practical project, I guess.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Alice. We'll get back to you during the Q&A, and please, participants, we have a chat. Feel free to put your questions there. And so at the end, once our three panelists have presented, we'll go there and grab your questions, give you the floor, and chat with our panelists and yourselves. Okay, so our next panelist, I will grab his bio to tell you more about him. His name is Dr. Justin Walsh. He's also an archaeologist specialized in intercultural contact, identity construction, the protection of cultural heritage, and the archaeology of human activity in space. Since 1998, he has excavated sites in the United States, in Spain, Jordan, and Italy. And he has directed the Chapman excavation at Castulo. I apologize for the pronunciation. Justin, I'm sure you'll be able to correct me. The Castulo project since 2014, investigating ancient Iberian consumption of imported goods near Linares in Spain. In 2016, he was a visiting professor at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Bristol, UK, and he has a space archaeology publication concerned the need for international protocols to protect heritage in space. So Justin, I think you also have a presentation for us. The floor is yours.
I do. Thank you so much, Alissa. I'm going to share that now. And thank you to everyone at Space for Women for including me in this discussion. So now, there we go, full screen. Okay, I'm just going to change my pointer. All right, so it's always difficult to follow Alice because she does such a great job with these presentations, making things so clear. I'm going to talk a little bit more about a different aspect of our project, the International Space Station Archaeological Project. Of course, we had to rip off Star Trek for our motto, but in any case, this is a project that we started about 5 years ago, and you know, this is something Alice and I have both been working in space archaeology for a lot longer than that. Alice, I think, since about 2003 or so, and myself since about 2008. And we met at a panel at an archaeology conference, and then you know, I happened in 2015, because I was following NASA on Twitter. I happened to see that they advertised for new astronaut candidates for the first time in a long time, and noticed that they said that archaeologists were not allowed to apply to be astronauts. Now, this is the 2015 group of astronauts. There's an ongoing search which has the same restrictions. So you'll notice that it says the following degree fields are not considered qualifying, and it says degrees in social sciences, geography, anthropology, archaeology, etc. And I was really surprised that they would even be so specific as to think of archaeology to exclude it. But it was pretty clear that they didn't think that that the social sciences had a lot to offer when it came to developing human space missions. And that was something that I thought was a shame. I thought that it was clear, at least to me and to colleagues like Alice, that examining how people live and work in a place can give you a lot of insight into how that entire project of living together is going to work. So we came up with this project, and we decided to focus on the International Space Station. I should note, by the way, the very sad news just overnight here in the United States of the passing of Representative John Lewis, who was such an icon of the civil rights movement from the 1960s onward. He actually, in 1993, cast the deciding vote to push ISS forward in 1993. So, that's a pretty interesting additional part of his legacy. So it's something worth remembering. In any case, here you're looking at this incredibly complex spacecraft, the International Space Station. And it's been in orbit now for almost 22 years. And it's been inhabited continuously for 20 years this coming November, more than 7,000 consecutive days. There's been at least 2 humans on board the spacecraft. So it seemed like an ideal site for archaeologists to look at, because it is by far the most intensively inhabited site in space that exists. And I'll give you some statistics here that you can look at. The number of different space agencies, different countries, number of people. Something like 42% of all the people who've ever been to space are visitors to ISS. And so there's a lot of information available to analyze what's been going on. And I always have to turn back to, this is from 1972, a document written by the National Academy of Sciences in the US, which used this phrase that I just thought was so perfect, that a spacecraft is a micro society in a mini world. That's really what we're interested in examining. But of course, our problem is, how do we get from here, which is me taking notes in the field at Costello, the site that Alissa just mentioned, how do we get from the site in space to the archaeologist who's actually studying and working on it and analyzing the material culture? And by the way, what I mean by material culture is simply the objects and the built spaces. That's really what archaeology is all about. And as Alice explained, it doesn't matter what period we're talking about. It can be right now, or it can be 10,000 years ago. The same basic concepts apply. We're using material culture to understand human activity and meanings and all the rest of it. So as we were thinking about this, it occurred to us that there's actually a very rich documentary record of life on the space station. I'm just going to go through a couple of images here. The photographs that have been taken over 20 years, you can see all the different kinds of things that crew members do. They work on experiments, they eat, right? And you can see that, the different members of the team. You can see the activities that they're undertaking, taking photographs, or they're exercising, as we saw in the first image. All of those different aspects of life. And in fact, that NASA's been collecting, and we're lucky, in fact, that digital photography kind of became a major technology at the same time that ISS was introduced. And so, in fact, there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of images, which we have the agreement with NASA to have access to the full archive of imagery that they have collected over those 20 years, and they've been steadily giving those to us for our analysis. This is an image I really like to look at, because we can see the whole crew at one time. We've got 3 Americans, 1 Italian, and 2 Russians in this image. This was tweeted by Sergei Ryazansky, who's right here. This is Sergei in the back. And this, you see the text of the tweet that accompanied the image, which says, essentially, our traditional meal together, this time in the American module Unity, and then in English, enjoyed the dinner together with a dream team. And this highlights a number of aspects of the culture of the space station. For example, that on a weekly basis, on Friday evenings, the crew gathers, usually in the Russian module Zvezda, which we'll be seeing in a second, but sometimes in the American module Unity, node 1, as it's also known, in order to have a meal together. And so they're building a common relationship with each other. They're recognizing their teamwork and their camaraderie and the fact that they're all living, as Alice said, together in this house that's orbiting above us. And then there's other aspects of it, like the fact that one group is the guest, or the group of guests, and one group is the group of hosts, and there's etiquette that goes along with going to somebody's house. Do you have to bring a gift? You have to be polite, you have to smile for photographs, this kind of thing, all of that. So there's a lot going on in this image that's more than just their eating. It's the way that they're building social bonds. Okay, so in an effort to kind of start to understand what it would take to catalog all of this material culture on board the space station, I started looking at photos, and I thinking about how many items are there in any given image. Here we're looking at the back wall of that Russian module Zvezda, which I mentioned a second ago. This is a hub of life on the space station because it has 2 crew berths. So there's one here with the door open and one here with the door closed. There's a portal to spacecraft right behind Koichi Wakata, who is in the center here. So a Soyuz or a Progress spaceship could be docked there. So it's a kind of a threshold to the spacecraft. There's a galley here, and right in front of these people is exercise equipment, a treadmill. So there's a lot of reasons why life is centered around this module. And what kinds of things do we see here? Well, there's a toy stuffed animal polar bear. There's a packet of blueberries on the galley table. There's another stuffed animal that's kind of bungeed to the wall inside. It's like a giraffe that's inside. But there's lots of items on the aft wall. We see a laptop, and there's a camera floating, and there's images, there's artworks. Specifically, there are Russian icons. There's 2 here. There's a third right there behind the head of this fellow. And then there's another one up here. There's a gold Orthodox cross. There's a Russian flag. There are mission patches. There's a painting of the most famous church in Russia. I'm fortunate to have a colleague at my university, at Chapman University, my colleague Wendy Salmond, who's an expert in Russian art. She's helped me identify all of these items. And we also have portraits of Yuri Gagarin here, and also, I'm blanking on his name now. I'm sorry, Alice, please remind me. The theorist, the Russian theorist. You're muted. Sorry.
Sorry, do you mean Konstantin Tsiolkovsky?
Tsiolkovsky, thank you so much. I don't. That's embarrassing, but I blanked on his name. Yes. So we see 2 images of him on the back wall here, and a toy Russian space shuttle. So there's lots of items here, and I was looking at these pictures, and it turns out that this space, actually, those items that are up there change all the time. So I started going through them, and in fact, actually, I should say there are a couple of main areas that I was looking at. There's this area that I call the top area, and then the area with the photographs is the niche, just for lack of a better name. And I went through and I quantified them, and so you can actually see that there's a pattern that emerges, so that you can see that in fact, there's not the same number of items that are on display on this wall. It changes. Early on, there were few, and then there were a lot, and then there were few, and then a lot. It's almost like a kind of a sine wave, and then few, and then etc. So in other words, the crew is moving things around. They're putting things up and they're taking them down. That's interesting. I also looked at, the number of religious items versus secular items, and it turns out that a third of the items that were posted on this wall are actually religious in nature, which is something that you might not have expected. And in fact, if we map that distinction of religious versus secular onto those counts, so this is the same counts, but we can actually now see which are religious and which are secular. We can see early on, even when there are a lot of items, very few of them are religious in nature, whereas later on, when there's a large number, let us say in 2007, 8, 9, many more of those items are religious in nature. So we can actually see that with different crews, there's different emphases on what's desired to display in their home. And this just shows you a kind of a further breakdown of the kinds of items. So, you know, the photographs that we were looking at, those are the most commonly seen. There were actually 414 different items that were put on the wall, over 48 images over 14 years. Photographs, icons, other kinds of pictures, mission patches and flags, those are the most common items that we see there. And just to give you some statistics, where do they show up? Well, the photographs are almost always, 74% of the time, are in the niche, whereas the icons tend to appear up in the top area. I'm not going to go through all of this. I know I have limited time, but I'll just say there are some that are very common. In fact, this image of Yuri Gagarin with a dove first appeared in Expedition 5, but it has appeared in every single image that has been taken of that wall since that time. So this is like the one constant. It's always there. And it's almost like he's a kind of secular saint or hero who's almost protecting the spacecraft. The second most common item is this very famous icon, the Mother of God of Kazan, which has appeared many, many times on that wall. Not consistently, but many, many times. As far as flags, maybe no surprise, but the Russian flag appears 3 times as often as the next most common flag. It's also usually slightly larger than the other flags. So this is interesting because we're looking at an international space station, or at least claimed to be an international space station, but there seem pretty obviously to be national characteristics. So I just want to return to this prohibition and suggest that actually we have a lot of insights that can be given into how people live in these spaces in space. And NASA and the other space agencies are certainly coming around to that. As I said, we're now cooperating with them. We're working on a proposal to actually have astronauts survey the interior of the space station on our behalf. And hopefully that'll be happening in the next couple of years. So if you are interested in our project, please follow us. We have a pretty active Twitter feed at ISS Archaeology. We're on Facebook, and we have a newly redesigned website that I think looks pretty cool. So I'll leave it there, and we'll leave it to questions now.
Thank you so much, Dustin, for this fascinating presentation. Alice also did an amazing job within the chat trying to tackle the flood of questions that we got. I think we never gotten that many amount of questions since the beginning of the show. So congratulations. It seems that space archaeology is one of the most popular topics ever, but it makes sense when listening to your presentations. So I picked maybe 2 of the questions from the chat as openings, and then we'll move on to the second part of the show with Ivonne and Hien. One thing is, a lot of things that you were describing to me, for my own profession, sounds like a lot of sociology of space and astrosociology. And so one question was asked by Vasu, who was asking, you seem to study intersection of cultures on the ISS. What kind of study should we do to become space archaeologists? And so I would add to that, and do you distinguish in some way space archaeology to sociology of space?
So, you know, the social sciences in general, sociology, anthropology, they're interested in a lot of the same issues. It's just a question of what are the techniques that you use to answer them. And so there actually have been, there's been a recent sociological study done by some Canadians called At Home in Space, where they gave questionnaires to crew members while they were on board. And we haven't seen all the results from that yet. But that's certainly one thing that you can do. You can actually ask people. We're planning to do some of that as well. But the difference is that in archaeology, and this has been shown since the beginning of kind of the subfield of contemporary archaeology, the archaeology of the contemporary world, that you can actually understand things that people are not necessarily either comfortable, sorry, I've got the glare of the sun behind me, that people might not be comfortable telling you things about their lives, or they might not be able to articulate those things. And but through the material evidence, we can actually see some aspects of their lives that are otherwise difficult to get at. So that's really the difference, I would say.
Yeah, and through your presentation, it was clear. You look at objects, you go and find traces of religious practices, and so I can absolutely see this practicality in your field of an archaeologist that looks at space and looks at the objects that are in space. But as and there was another question about do objects need to be in space to be considered for space archaeology? Alice quickly said no in the chat, but I'll let you elaborate if you'd like.
Yeah, of course. So I think the way we would define it is anything, any material culture, any structures or artifacts that are associated with human activity that's either in space, which is what we've been talking about, or is on Earth and directed at space, is what we would consider to be space archaeology. So you could look, for example, at Kourou, the ESA launch site, or Cape Canaveral, or Vandenberg Air Force Base, or any of these places where that activity is happening. Johnson Space Center could be a site of space archaeology. Did stuff coming back from the space station on the shuttle, did that get buried somewhere at Kennedy Space Center? Maybe. Then we could dig it up and we'd be doing kind of traditional archaeological techniques, but on space stuff, so it would still be space archaeology.
Of course. So when you said you defined it as space archaeology, so would you advise Vasu and all of those who are now completely fascinated by your field to go and to study archaeology and then specialize in space archaeology when possible?
Yeah, well, space archaeology is a developing field. And I mean, it's early stages yet, and we would love to see more people get involved with it. I think that the main thing that I would do is get a degree in archaeology in general, and then you could actually start to specialize in some space subjects. It's really the archaeological mindset that I think is really important. And then, if you're becoming an academic, you would write your thesis, for example, on some topic related to space. That would be really my advice.
Yeah, learn the methodology of archaeologists and then apply it to space. I think it connects with Sweta's question, which is, I think, the last one before we move on, who was asking what are the current research topics. So we talked about of space archaeology and the current projects. We talked about your work and Alice's work on the ISS and on space debris. Are there other topics? And I'm now thinking of all those students who are going to sign up to study archaeology and are thinking already about their PhD thesis.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, there's a lot of space agency sites, and Alice has taken students to survey at Woomera in Australia, and there's a colleague of ours, Beth O'Leary, who's at New Mexico State University. She's been looking at the compasses that are out in the desert of Arizona that are used or were used for the Corona satellites, the spy satellites, to orient them properly. So you can just go out in the landscape and you can find a lot of stuff that's related to space. So there's that kind of thing. There's also the so-called spacecraft graveyard out in the Pacific.
Yeah.
Who knows what's left there? What items actually survived, re-entry and sank to the bottom of the Pacific? It's about 5,000 or 6,000 meters down, but it would be really interesting to find out.
The SPOA, South Pacific Ocean Unpopulated Area, where they bring everything down. Alice, again, you're a trooper on the chat. Do you want to add anything before we move on to the presentation from Ivonne?
Oh, I think Justin has covered it pretty comprehensively, but there's really, Justin, I mean, there'd be less than 10 people in the world who focus solely on space archaeology, wouldn't you say? Every nation has its own space heritage, its own, problems and questions about the space material that it has. So we tend to focus on the big ticket stuff, like, ISS, Apollo sites, all of that. But everywhere you are in the world, there will be some space material culture, and that's at that local or national and local level, just hardly anything has been done. There's so much potential.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for these presentations and answering all of these questions. And thank you to all participants for your dynamic questions. It's been a pleasure. Hien, I leave the floor to you to introduce our next speaker, Ivonne Delaflor.
Thank you, Alissa. Thank you, all participants and speakers so far. Welcome, Ivonne Delaflor. She is a futurist and a specialist in sustainable human transformation. She is also the creator and founder of the Transcendental Rebirthing Method, a master trainer of futuring, which I will get back to you, a public speaker, a film producer, creator of the Sacred Codes of AHA, Sacred Geometry, is the vice president of the Brilliant Futures Institute and founder of the organization Master Alive. Ivonne is the author also of 17 books and 2 music CDs. She's also a mother, my mentor, and my beloved friend. So she is actually the woman that may have brought us all together into this room with one of her teaching techniques, which is called futuring. I don't know to these days what to this day what you did, Ivonne, but maybe you can share that via your own personal story. And the reason why I brought Ivonne in is she's also a teacher for sacred geometry. So if you would like to start with your personal story and then share what sacred geometry is and how we can use the future of technology, may that be hidden in the language of the sacred geometry. Ivonne.
Wow, thank you so much. I have a little presentation after Miss Alice and Mr. Justin. I'm not sure if I want to put it. It's so simple, right? It was so incredible. First, I'm so honored to be here. It's like a dream come true. Every time I get to be surrounded by smarter people, it's like it just enriches my soul. So is that okay if I share the slides, Hien?
Yes.
It's just telling me that I need a password for some reason. Zoom has been interesting.
It's very interesting. Yeah, it worked with Justin and Alice.
Okay, I'll try it again. Maybe if I add this password, it's asking me for a password, but hopefully you'll be able to see it.
It works.
So hello, everyone. I'll go through the futuring thing in a moment, and I'll just go it's a very simple presentation. Again, I'm super honored to be here. I've been a witness of the creation of SpaceConneX and Space for Women, and I'm in awe and so grateful that you all are working on this. It gives me, you know, it's my first time being here, and it gives me, as a human, as a citizen, as a civilian, it gives me a lot of hope for humanity and for space just to hear all of this. And actually, it's highly understandable. A lot of people maybe don't go into the architecture of space because they don't understand, but how simple it is. And that's how spirituality should be too, right? Spirituality being a science of the study of nature, but in the human psyche, in our mind, in our emotions, and our social conditions. So this is a little bit of me, which is my story, Hien, very quickly. I'm an author. She shared, I published 17 books, most of them about spirituality, about conscious parenting, about the use of our words. I'm such a believer about the power of the words for us to create patterns, create inner systems, kind of like I'm an inner archaeologist of the soul while you all are exploring space. I'm such a believer of the inner space, such a believer after surviving a near-death experience. At the age of 17, I was dead like 27 seconds. My arm was caught in the car, it was totally lost. I picked it up from the backseat of a car. My leg was out, it's back. Thanks to science, I'm put all together again, thanks to science and my mindset in that moment. I'm here. So have a master's in business and administration. I've been a meditator for more than 20 years of all sorts of training of the mind, from Buddhism, Vipassana, all the Sanskrit and Hindu traditions, transcendental meditation, which bases a lot of its research on science. I've been serving my community with family constellations, an incredible doctor from Germany that right now I forgot his name, but if someone remembers, please put it. I don't have my partner like Justin and Alice, like, can you remember the name? But he was a psychologist, very practical psychologist, who had an experience of visiting tribes in Africa. Thank you so much. Visiting tribes in Africa and seeing how functional the family system was there. Well, in the West, the civil world, we were all in chaos. This family system was so functional. There was a pattern, there was a harmonic, there was a human behavior that was highly intelligent when they didn't have anything that we have developed or discovered. So I went into study of that super strong, and 20 years have been serving my community on that. And what family constellations do very quickly, it develops new imagery for the mind of people that have a lot of trauma, that have incomplete patterns in their mind of their behavior, of the situations that have lived in the past. Trauma, all sorts of trauma, all sorts of feelings of abandonment, of not belonging, healthy bonding and attachment, all of that, which I think, right now that I heard you, Miss Alice and Justin, is going to be, I believe, super important for people in space to create a sense of bonding, attachment, and belonging to wherever they are at, so we don't experience this kind of detachment or this longing or this separation or fragmentation as we evolve and expand into space. I'm a near-death experience survivor. I have literally, my arm was sewed back. You could see it. It was sewed nerve by nerve, muscle by muscle. Futurist, very quickly. Why? Because I had the honor to study with a German physicist, a Czechoslovakian scientist, and another German businessman who was a yogi, that the German government called for these three men to develop a program called Futuring for when the Berlin Wall was removed in Germany. They had a fear. What's going to happen when now Berlin, comes into, many of you are in Berlin right now, I believe. But what's going to happen when the wall comes down? And the other side of Germany is a capitalist. We have grown incredible, but the other side has been trained and has the patterns of socialism. You see, so how do you match a world of the past into a world expanding into the future now? So they developed this system. They even studied it with neurofeedback, for those of you who know that, a system that uses your own imagery processes. And Justin, you were speaking about the micro into the micro world, right? About how to bring microenvironments into micro world. But these imagery processes, and this is how Hien, she says that maybe was all created from there. But how to use imagery processes to create micro input to generate macro results from the inner space. So that's a little bit of futuring. I've been a student of the power of words, what they do, the shapes they create, of harmonics, frequency, sound, color, and obviously of sacred geometry. So just very quickly, and my slides are super small. I know they're 20, but I'll go as fast as possible. My childhood experiences, I'll start with my story. This is a pattern that I've been seeing since really young. I was really sick at the age of 7. They brought doctors. They didn't know what I had. I had a fever. They couldn't figure it out. While this was happening and everybody was on chaos, I had such high fever. And there's a lot of science behind this. I'll just keep it in my area of expertise, which is the spiritual side. But all I could see during the fever was this shape being formed. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, and on the 7th day, the whole, it's called the Sri Yantra. For those of you who live in India, you probably have seen this a lot for meditation. But I saw all these triangles, all these moving forms changing, just like in space, there's no gravity kind of thing. And when the last triangle formed, my fever was gone. So that was when I was 7 years old. The same happened to me when I was in the car in the near-death experience, that I was super awake. Obviously, there was adrenaline involved, etc. But I was aware this shape was happening, and I knew instantaneously I was not going to lose the arm. I could see this shape like keeping my human form together. You are the scientist. If you figure it out, please let me know, because till this day, my only evidence is that I'm a walking, living entity with a sewed arm, a sewed leg, and I'm walking and I'm here with you all. So I had so many spontaneous healings. I also am a mother of a son that was diagnosed with autism. And guess what he drew since very young? This shape. It's like a way of the brain trying to reincorporate itself into harmony, into the patterns of the universe that you can see them everywhere. So this is a little bit of the story here. And obviously, you know, science, you all know what science is, but the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. I'm definitely experiment. I'm the experiment for others to observe. You know, I have arrived to this by incident, accident, and experience. And I have been studying and observing the evidences in my life, what you call facts, the evidences in my life that there is geometry, pattern, sacredness. And I am such a believer on mathematics as being as the spiritual language in my words of God. I truly believe that, because the harmony of the universe is unbelievable to me. And it needs to be mathematical. I don't know for you, but for me, that just makes a sense. And in it, because of these shapes appearing in my life, because of me having an arm, because of my son bringing that imagery over and over again, I became a student of sacred geometry, and I began to draw it obsessively, kind of like perhaps I had a little bit of Asperger's, or that obsessiveness with shapes and forms. And I started drawing them. I started with the experience and then the study. A lot of people start with the study and then they experience and then they implement. For me, has always been the other way. Sacred geometry being defined on the Urban Dictionary as the underlying geometry in nature. Now, I'm a spiritual teacher, but not the typical spiritual teacher. A lot of people get like thrown off, like, you're a spiritual teacher, but you believe in the future. You see, in my niche, if you talk about the future, you are crazy, right? And I always tell them a very practical thing. If you don't believe in the future, just tell me who's going to pay your rent next month. Right? You know, they all tell me it's all the now, it's all the present moment, but it's, I believe, thanks to futurists like you, or you all are a futurist, because anyone that works into space, into expansion, into evolution, it's really trying to preserve and to expand human consciousness into more of what we are, into more of the universe, into really achieving human potential. I love what Ali said, that suddenly she's looking at the sky and she becomes aware of the, I think it's young space doctor. I don't want to misquote you, but for me, that's all. For me, that gives me like, wow, that's evolution right there. That's expansion. That's a call to action for all of us, whether in science or spirituality, to really put our scientific minds together, emotional, social, etc., just to create more expansion for the human society and hence for human beings. But it's the underlying geometry in nature. I'm a believer that if I can see it, you know, if I can see it, and if I can see it work and the harmony patterns on it, that's for me, that's God. So nature, I've been a student of the natural law for many, many years. I actually base my work on that. Everything has a cycle, everything has a time, everything has a time to live and to die. Obviously, I got to live twice, die once so far. It shapes, you know, you can find natural law in nature, fractals, reoccurring patterns and ratios. Spirit science describes it as the geometry of consciousness, which I'm highly interested of. What makes you conscious? What made Alice, you know, have that thought over 1,000 thoughts? We may have 5,000 something thoughts. they say, gentlemen, they say, that's why you are far much more, they said, focus onto one thing, but women more capable to do multitask. You have 1,000 something thoughts, women have 5,000. What made Alice choose, natural selection, choose that thought and become, you know, the great space archaeologist that she is right now? I'm interested on that. I'm interested in that human behavior, inner human environment, so we can really expand and continue the development of consciousness no matter the space we are in. So sacred geometry in the history of mankind has been creating balance. And I think that's what you all are searching here with SpaceConneX. And there's always both male and female energy involved, polarities, positive and negative. So it's very simple. And that's what I use when it comes to people tapping more into who they are, getting to know their inner space, the inner universe. So when I go and collaborate with someone, instead of coming from a very limited state of mind, I come like you all come into space with expansion, with openness, with possibilities, and hopefully, you know, with a way that we all can evolve. This is sacred geometry to its finest. This is a sunflower. It has a golden ratio in it. It has Fibonacci sequences. It has all of the shapes. I'm going to show them to you in a moment. It's in you. It's in me. Actually, before we were conceived, and that's why I created this something called the Transcendental Rebirthing System, which is really healthy bonding and attachment with the mother, studying where do we break the bonds, where do we become so fragmented sometimes in our thoughts that we begin to live from our past instead of an expansion and a desire to live into the future, which is the natural evolutionary impulse of all of us human beings. But you can see in the seed, you started as a seed, you know, the sperm and the egg meet, and first sacred geometry we have, because the egg and the sperm, once they are conceived, they become two circles that now in science and also in spirituality is called the Vesica Piscis, which has been used a lot in religion, a lot as the symbol. And I love what you showed, Justin. I think it was you, Justin, or Alice, this space, like kind of an oval shape, elongated oval where the astronauts and the people in space can live, is very similar to the womb. So in a way, we are bringing what we already did in the womb into outer space. And for me, those studies and help people adapt quicker. Obviously, I had to do it because I had so many accidents and incidents in my life. But I've been able to adapt and move forward and help thousands of people already. I have done Transcendental Rebirthing, which is rebirthing. It's the healing of trauma from childhood experiences, more than 10,000 something people now all over the world. So I don't have they have the inner evidence of how they have moved forward in their life, how their trauma became their healing, how experience has become their teacher, instead of keep creating stories and their future from their past. Hope this makes sense. And I'll check the chat in a moment because obviously I'm not that tech savvy, but here I am. So the great philosopher Plato famously said, God geometrizes continually. Sacred geometry is used in the construction of many religion structures. So I was seeing all this Russian art that you were putting. I have tons of notes of your presentation, ranging from places of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim worship, churches, temples, mosques, altars, monuments, holy wells, and religious sites of all sorts. What I'm interested here is the point of union, right? That point where everything unites, so that we can actually have peace on space, so that we can actually go, when there is decolonization of Earth or colonization of other places, how do we do it? How do we bring peace into those places too, as you all bring the science of creating a good environment for humans to live and to adapt and to relate and to have emotional, social, and spatial. Now we're moving. I'm so incredible grateful to be here, because now for me, you are the evidence that we're moving into another intelligence, space intelligence, which is not something that a lot of us on Earth have. I'm just being introduced to this now by you all. So I'm super grateful because now my work of the inner work that I help people with will expand. So here are, one of the churches. You can see all of these, the circles, the pattern, every single geometry here. Those of you who are into sound healing and sound therapy and study the power of sound, which is extremely, extremely healing for so many people, every single pattern creates a different sound and a different effect and impact in our mind. It reaches the holy on us. It reaches the mystery, that, again, the evolutionary impulse to try to find what's more, what else? Where is it? Is there life in the universe? Is there more? How can we adapt? It just invokes the cultivation of a higher intelligence within us. Obviously, these churches are designed in a very specific way for you to go worship certain objects, certain things. While in my work, I want to find these churches within. I want to find the sacred geometry of the soul, of consciousness, and hopefully one day you all scientists will be able to find more factual evidence. The harmonics, this is what I'm interested. I'm not interested in balance, because balance, is very personal for people. I'm interested in harmony. If you have a Russian scientist, you have someone from Peru or Mexico in that space station, how do we create harmony with different cultures, different biases, different religions, traditions, and beliefs, so that the task, the mission in space can be accomplished? So that's what I'm interested in. And I'm a student of natural law, observation, observation, observation. The harmonics created by sacred architecture amplifies our connection to spirit, to that mystery, to that unknown, maximizes our potential, heightens our everyday threshold of harmony and bliss. Everybody wants to feel bliss. Everybody wants to have a passion. Everybody wants to discover something. That's what I mean by bliss. Sacred geometry is woven through all that exists. Whether we want it or not, whether we want to call it sacred, you can just call it geometry. It's again like the term of God. Many people don't like the term of God. I am not married to the definition of words. Whatever serves you to achieve higher consciousness and more evolution, that's what I want you to use. It is the invisible architecture of creation, the archaeology of the inner world, which is the stamp of the cosmos, which we can find it, recognize it, and become friends with it. A very quick fun fact, I thought I will do a fun fact. Did you know that the hexagon is the strongest shape known? I didn't put the weakest because you all are scientists. Do you know which one is the weakest form? The hexagon is the strongest. Just put it on the chat if you know which one is the weakest. But not many people know this, but if you want something to hold a lot of weight, pick a hexagon. And I'm interested to see how that will play into space. One of the most advanced societies, the bees on our Earth. This is the hexagon. This is the sacred. Ralph Waldo Emerson, which was a transcendentalist and a literally avid student of law, of the natural law, he said, whether in space or on Earth, whoever masters geometry will have mastered the worlds. I love that. I love that. That was a phrase that it came to my awareness when I was 9 years old, and it shaped my spiritual path so strongly. So which one is the weakest? I'm not seeing the chat. Oh, thank you, Alice.
We have two more minutes, Ivonne. We have 2 more minutes.
Okay, yeah, I'm almost done. It's actually the triangle, loves. It's actually the triangle. So I'm just going to skip through it. So the most common geometry considered sacred are the Egyptian flower of life, the Hebrew, the Vesica Piscis, and the Italian Borromean rings, also known as the Holy Trinity. This is Richard Merrick. And I'll show you this really quickly. This is the cultivar in nature, the Holy Trinity. And you can see these symbols in churches. This is the Parnassus, I never can pronounce it. And this is the Quadra Vesica Piscis. You can see it in orbits, you can see it in space. You see, this is a way, for me, sacred geometry. It's a bridge of a language between all of our different cultures, traditions, religions, and beliefs. All of this, you can find it on space. All of this you can find it in nature. This is a man I recommend for you to study, if so you choose. He found the patterns in crystals. He found them everywhere, and how one crystal created the other, one shape creates the other, and how this can restore harmony into our brain. His name was Marcel Vogel, and he has very particular crystals. If those of you who would like to study this, he was the crystallographer of the world. And this is my favorite shape, and I'm almost done. The creation of the universe is believed to have happened according to a geometric plan. I believe personally, because of my experience of the golden ratio, I do a lot of sacred geometry and I always use the golden ratio. Plato said God geometrizes. I believe if we could have a snapshot of God, it will be geometry. It will be mathematics. It will be the shapes of the universe. It will be like, wow, we have God in plain sight. It's called space. It's called planets. It's called consciousness. It's called exploration of being. It's called whatever you want. So God, nature, space, exploration, evolution is truly the geometry of the world. So this is something I recommend. I'm completed. This is another doctor I studied with. It was Dr. Masaru Emoto. He was able to find the power of our words, something to consider in space, the power because of the freezing temperatures or warming temperatures, whatever it is. The power of our words, the power of our inner geometry, thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and words will create the patterns of our conscious living experience. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. I've never been so excited in my life. This is like, I feel like, okay, I'm gone. I'm completed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ivonne. This, I know we went a little bit over time. This was an amazing presentation. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Justin and Dr. Alice, Ivonne and Alissa to moderate. I know it's very late in Australia. I'm happy to go over time and go through a few questions. There are a lot of questions from the participants. I know, Alice, it's very late for you, but I'm happy to continue here with the Q&A. Alissa?
I can stay a little bit longer.
Okay, just 1-2 questions for you, and then we'll let you sleep, go up to sleep.
Sleep will be good.
Any questions you would like to ask Alissa? Please unmute yourself and ask her directly.
And Alice did an incredible job through the chat too. I think she answered all questions. So that might be why, because she, every single question, I kept an eye on the chat and every single question was answered. So thank you very much, Alice. I think it's the first time also that we had so many questions and also so many involvement from our speakers to tackle all questions. So thank you for that.
Well, so many interesting questions. So thank you, everybody, for asking such great things. Perhaps I might bid everyone good night and go to bed. If there's any more specific space archaeology things, I'll leave that in the mind, for the mind of Justin, who is fresh and awake in the early morning. Thank you very much for hosting us tonight. This has been a wonderful panel. So hope to hear more great space women panels in the future. So good night, everyone.
Night.
Oh, before you disconnect, maybe we can take the picture right now while we still have Alice, right?
Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Stay safe, stay healthy.
Good night. Good day. Good morning.